I used to believe family gatherings were predictable, filled with polite smiles and empty compliments, until one evening proved me completely wrong in the most humiliating way imaginable. My name is Eden Grant, and 2 weeks ago I thought my life in Los Angeles had finally reached balance. After years of working 16-hour days, I was promoted to marketing director, and the first thing I did was buy myself a Tesla, my one personal reward for everything I had built from nothing. When my mother invited me to her 60th birthday celebration at the Los Angeles Event Hall, I said yes without hesitation. It felt like the right time to reconnect to celebrate her milestone, surrounded by family and old friends. Over 50 guests filled the room that night, each holding a glass of champagne as music played softly behind the chatter. My father stood near the center talking about business while my brother laughed at every compliment tossed his way. They fit perfectly into the crowd, confident, comfortable, admired. I sat at the corner table, smiling when necessary, trying not to think about how invisible I felt. The lights dimmed slightly as Mom stepped forward with a microphone in hand. Her voice, calm and proud, carried across the hall. Tonight, she said, my daughter Eden will give her Tesla to her brother as a gift. The room froze. I felt 50 pairs of eyes turn toward me, waiting for approval. I stood, my pulse hammering, and said firmly, "That's not happening." Dad moved first. His hand struck my face with a sound so sharp the music stopped. My earring hit the floor, rolling somewhere beneath the tables. I wiped my lip, lifted my chin, and walked out, while the whispers followed behind me. If your family tried to humiliate you like that in front of everyone, would you stay silent or walk away like I did? Tell me what you would have done. A week before the party, I almost believed we were a normal family. It had been years since we all sat down together without tension or judgment, and when Mom called to invite me, her voice sounded almost gentle. For a moment, I thought maybe things were changing, but that hope was short-lived. Just like every other time, I believed she saw me as more than the daughter who didn't need help. Growing up, Mom always defended my brother Ryan no matter what he did. When he broke Dad's favorite watch, she said it was an accident. When he failed his classes, she blamed his teachers. When he crashed his first car, she said he was under too much pressure. And when he lost another job, she sighed and said, "He just needs another chance." I learned early that love in our house came with rules, and those rules never seemed to include me. Dad's version of fairness was even simpler. He said that men deserved more room to stumble because the world was harder on them. I used to wonder what world he lived in, because in mine, I had to be twice as good to be noticed at all. I worked my way through college, sometimes taking 2 jobs just to pay rent. I skipped vacations, turned down dinners, and built a career brick by brick until I finally got promoted. The day I drove my Tesla home, the one I had dreamed of since I was a teenager, the driveway was empty. No one came outside. No one asked to see it. When I walked in, Mom didn't even look up from her phone. "That's nice, dear," she said, then started talking about Ryan's new idea to start a podcast. Ryan, who still lived off Mom's credit card, smiled like he had earned something too. It wasn't anger I felt that day. It was quiet, heavy disbelief that no matter how far I climbed, I would always be the one standing alone. The irony was that I never blamed Ryan for taking advantage of the comfort he was given. I blamed the people who built the cushion for him to fall on again and again, while expecting me to land on concrete. Mom said I was lucky to be independent. She said Ryan just hadn't found himself yet. I wanted to ask her how long that search was supposed to take, but I had learned to save my words. Nothing I said ever changed anything. Then one afternoon, a cream envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was the invitation to Mom's 60th birthday. The gold lettering shimmered under the light, and for a second I smiled. Maybe this was a chance to reconnect. Maybe we could finally sit together without the unspoken comparisons. I even bought a new dress, something simple but elegant, because I wanted to believe there could be peace for one night. I told myself it didn't matter if no one noticed me, that I was there to celebrate Mom, not prove anything. but deep down, I wanted her to look at me and feel proud for once. I had no idea that the night I planned to honor her would be the same night she would humiliate me in front of everyone we knew. That evening, light music played softly in the background, and for a brief moment the room felt like a family again. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt until Mom cleared her throat and asked everyone to quiet down. She smiled the kind of smile she used whenever she was about to make a performance out of something. "Tonight," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone, "I want to make a special announcement. My daughter Eden will hand her Tesla to her brother Ryan as a symbol of family love and support." The sound of forks against plates stopped instantly. The laughter froze. It was as if the air itself had turned to glass. Every pair of eyes at the table turned toward me, waiting for my reaction. I could feel the weight of 50 strangers measuring the worth of my silence. My pulse beat in my ears, but I forced my voice to stay calm. "That's not going to happen." The words came out even steady, too quiet at first, but sharp enough to cut through the silence. Dad's chair scraped against the floor. He stood, his face flushed, red veins visible at his temples. I could tell by the way his hand tightened that this was not going to end with words. "Eden," he said, his tone low and dangerous, "you will do as your mother says." I didn't move. He stepped closer. For a second I thought he might stop, that pride would keep him from making a scene in front of their friends. But then his hand struck across my face hard enough that the sound echoed. The sting came before the shock. I felt the room tilt slightly and my earring slipped loose, hitting the floor somewhere near the stage. No one spoke. Someone gasped quietly. The silence that followed was worse than the slap itself. Ryan lowered his head but said nothing. The guests held their phones halfway in the air, uncertain whether to keep recording or pretend they hadn't. I saw flashes. Some had already started filming before the blow landed. Mom froze, her hand gripping the microphone so tightly her knuckles went white. She didn't step forward. She didn't tell Dad to stop. Her lips parted, but no words came out. That was the moment I realized this wasn't shock, it was choice. I straightened slowly, feeling the burn still spreading across my cheek. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. Instead, I reached for my clutch, found my phone, and walked toward the exit. Behind me, people began whispering again, their voices blending into a low hum. The sound followed me down the hall, sharp and cold, like static. Outside, the air was cooler. I stepped onto the pavement, my hand shaking slightly as I scrolled to my contacts. The moment the call connected, I spoke. "It's happening now." On the other end, the voice of my attorney, John Carter, came through, steady and controlled. "Stay calm. I'm on my way." I hung up, exhaling slowly, realizing that everything that had been simmering beneath the surface of my family had finally cracked open for everyone to see. The years of silence, the excuses, the favoritism, all of it had been leading to this exact moment. I leaned against my car and looked back through the glass doors of the hall. Inside, I could still see Mom standing on the stage, her expression unreadable, while Dad stood beside her pretending nothing had happened. Ryan stayed seated, staring at his hands. The applause for the band resumed after a moment, but it sounded hollow. I sat in my car, the throbbing in my cheek fading slowly. For the first time, I felt an unfamiliar mix of pain and clarity. There was no going back after this, no way to unsee the truth of who they were. 20 minutes later, the doors of the hall swung open and every head turned as John entered. His presence carried the calm authority of someone who knew exactly why he was there. He walked to the center of the room, his suit unwrinkled, despite the tension that thickened the air. My parents stood frozen by the stage, their earlier confidence replaced by confusion. The music had already stopped. Conversations turned into whispers, then silence. John greeted the crowd politely, introducing himself as my attorney, his voice clear and steady. He placed a leather folder on the nearest table, opened it, and said he had come to clarify a legal matter concerning the ownership of a certain vehicle. His tone was composed but unyielding, every word cutting through the quiet. Mom's face stiffened. She stepped forward, smiling nervously as she insisted that this was all a misunderstanding, that the family was just celebrating, and emotions had gotten ahead of us. But John didn't even glance at her. He calmly raised a document stamped and signed and explained that the Tesla in question was registered solely under my name, purchased with my personal income, and fully insured under my own account. He stated that no transfer or shared ownership had ever been filed. Each sentence sounded heavier than the last. Dad stood still, his hands clenched at his sides, eyes darting between John and the guests, who were now whispering again. One woman quietly left her chair, followed by two others trying not to make eye contact as they slipped toward the exit. Ryan stared at the floor, pretending to adjust his cufflink, his face pale. The image of him earlier smug and certain was gone. He looked like a child caught in something too big for him to handle. John didn't prolong the moment. He simply turned to face the room and said in the calmest voice possible that the car in question belonged solely to Eden Grant. The sentence hung in the air, impossible to dispute. Nobody moved. Even the waiters had stopped refilling glasses. The air felt cold, like the night had suddenly shifted. Mom opened her mouth again, perhaps to plead or explain, but no sound came. Dad's eyes dropped, shoulders heavy, and for the first time in my life I saw defeat in his posture. Ryan whispered something under his breath, though I couldn't catch it. The silence that followed felt endless. I turned away, walked past the tables and the stunned faces, and pushed through the open doors. Behind me, I could still hear the low hum of murmurs, the faint echo of shoes against marble, and John's calm voice speaking to someone else. Outside, the night air felt sharp. I took one deep breath and kept walking, not once looking back. By the next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. At first, I thought it was work, a client crisis maybe. But when I saw hundreds of notifications across every platform, my stomach tightened. Someone at the party had posted the video. The title read, "The Tesla Slap." It showed everything: my mother's announcement, my father's reaction, the sound of his hand meeting my face, and the silence that followed. Within hours, the clip had exploded online. Millions of views, countless comments, endless debates about family loyalty, entitlement, and public humiliation. My name, my face, my life, everywhere. At first, I didn't know whether to feel humiliated or vindicated. The comments ranged from sympathy to outrage. "Stay strong, Eden. You didn't deserve that." "Parents like these ruin families." Others argued I should have handled it privately, as if that had ever been an option. The algorithms did their job too well. By noon, every news outlet in Los Angeles had picked up the story. Some blurred my face. Most didn't. By afternoon, the consequences began to unfold. My father's company, Grant Financial, faced immediate backlash. Major partners suspended contracts citing ethical concerns. Investors pulled out, employees resigned. My mother's social circle, the prestigious Women in Business Association, issued a quiet statement thanking her for past service and removing her from the board. In less than 24 hours, the image of our perfect family shattered. The house that once hosted charity galas and business dinners now sat behind closed curtains. Ryan didn't escape the fallout either. His so-called friends unfollowed him. Group chats went silent, and the girl he'd been bragging about ghosted him entirely. For the first time, he wasn't being protected or excused. He sent me a short text that read, "This got out of control." I didn't reply. I had nothing left to say to him. Meanwhile, my inbox overflowed with messages from strangers, hundreds, then thousands. Some were journalists asking for interviews. Others were people who had lived through similar things: daughters overlooked sons, disrespected siblings, blamed for standing up. They told me they cried watching the clip, that they finally felt seen. I read as many as I could, each one a reminder that pain shared publicly can ripple far beyond intention. In the middle of that chaos, my best friend Alicia Moore showed up at my door. She didn't knock twice. When I opened, she was holding 2 coffees and a calm expression that only someone who has known you for decades can have. She didn't ask how I was or what had happened. She just sat down on my couch, handed me a cup, and said quietly, "You finally stood up for yourself." Her words sank deeper than she probably expected. I realized she'd seen every compromise I'd ever made, every time I kept silent for peace, every moment I let someone else take the spotlight because I didn't want conflict. That day, she didn't need to comfort me with long speeches or promises. Just sitting there drinking coffee in silence felt like a small victory. The internet had turned my private humiliation into public justice. Yet for the first time in years, I felt no shame. I hadn't planned to expose anyone, but maybe the truth had finally found a way out that I never could have managed on my own. 2 weeks later, someone knocked on my apartment door. The sound startled me because hardly anyone ever came by without calling first. I hesitated before opening it, expecting maybe a delivery. But when the door swung open, my parents stood there holding a bouquet of white lilies. The sight froze me in place. They looked older, smaller somehow, their confidence gone. Mom's eyes were red and Dad's posture was heavy, like the weight of everything that had happened had finally settled on his shoulders. For a moment, none of us spoke. Mom tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "Hi, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice breaking halfway through the word. Dad cleared his throat, gripping the flowers too tightly. "We thought we should come see you," he added, his tone stiff but uncertain. I stepped aside just enough for them to enter, more out of politeness than warmth. The apartment felt too quiet once the door closed. Mom placed the lilies on the counter. "They're your favorite," she said. I didn't correct her. They weren't. She just remembered wrong, as she often did. Dad took a deep breath and looked around as if trying to find a safe place to begin. "We've lost everything, Eden. The business is gone, the investors have pulled out, even the house might go next. We need your help to fix it." The words came out heavy, like stones being dropped one by one. I waited, letting the silence stretch until it was unbearable. "You didn't lose me," I finally said. "You threw me away." My voice didn't shake. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something colder and deeper, the quiet clarity that comes when you stop expecting change. Mom covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. She reached out, trying to take my hand. I stepped back, not out of cruelty, but because I no longer had the strength to pretend. Her fingers froze midair, the gesture hanging between us like a memory of something that no longer existed. Dad lowered his head. "We made mistakes," he said almost in a whisper. "We thought we were doing what was best for everyone." I looked at him, the man who had once decided what my future should look like, without ever asking me. "You were doing what was best for you," I said quietly. Mom wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "Please, Eden, we're still a family." I wanted to believe that, but the word no longer meant what it used to. Family had become something fragile, built on apologies that came too late, and trust that couldn't be rebuilt with flowers. A phone buzzed on the counter. It was mine. Ryan had sent a message. "I'll try to change." That was all it said. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then turned it face down. There were no words left that could bridge the distance between us. Mom looked at me again, as if searching for one last sign of forgiveness. I couldn't give it. I walked to the door and opened it. They understood. Dad nodded slowly, guiding her out without another word. The lilies stayed behind, their scent too sweet for the room. When the door clicked shut, I leaned against it, exhaling slowly. My hands were steady. No anger, no tears, just a tired kind of peace. It was strange how final silence could feel. The world outside carried on, indifferent to the wreckage that had once been my family. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and stood in the quiet, realizing that sometimes survival doesn't come from holding on, but from finally letting go. 3 months later, my life had finally gone quiet. The chaos had faded, replaced by a calm that felt both unfamiliar and earned. Mornings began with coffee by the window instead of phone calls filled with tension. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt like mine. I had moved into a new apartment overlooking the city, not extravagant, but bright, open, and peaceful. It was the first space I'd ever chosen purely for myself. At work, things had changed quickly. The board of directors had recognized my performance over the past year, and I was promoted to oversee a larger regional branch. The offer came with a salary that once would have shocked even my parents. I didn't celebrate it with anyone. Instead, I spent the evening reviewing contracts, signing a final agreement that transferred full ownership of the shares my father had once held in Grant Financial to me. The irony wasn't lost. What he had built through control, I had reclaimed through independence. The media had long since moved on to newer scandals, leaving my name behind. I was grateful for that. Yet every now and then someone still sent messages thanking me for standing up for myself. It reminded me that the story had meant something beyond my family, that it had started conversations about respect, equality, and the boundaries children are allowed to set with their parents. Those small messages meant more than any headline. Ryan had finally found a job. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he was delivering packages for a local company, working long shifts, but managing on his own. It was the first time in his life he wasn't living off someone else's effort. I didn't reach out, though. I wished him well in silence. I had learned that forgiveness doesn't always require reunion. Sometimes it's enough to simply release resentment. Mom kept out of the public eye. After the story broke, she withdrew from her social circles and sold several properties. A friend mentioned she now volunteered quietly at a community center. Dad had retired early, his reputation too damaged to rebuild. The last time I saw a photo of him online, he looked smaller, tired, but maybe finally human. For years he had chased power. Now perhaps he understood the price of it. As for me, life moved forward. I began collaborating with John on a nonprofit project aimed at helping women gain financial independence, something neither of us had planned, but both cared about deeply. We spent weeks building its foundation, free workshops, mentorship programs, and partnerships with local businesses. John's calm professionalism balanced my drive, and for the first time in a long while, work didn't just mean survival, it meant purpose. On a quiet Friday evening, we hosted our first event. Dozens of women came, some uncertain, others determined. As I watched them take notes and ask questions, I realized I wasn't just helping them. I was helping the version of myself who once thought she had to earn love through obedience. That version was gone, now replaced by someone who finally understood that independence is not rebellion. It's respect for oneself. When the night ended, I lingered by the door as the last few attendees left, each one smiling with a new kind of hope. John handed me a folder and said, "You did good today." I smiled back. We both did. Driving home, the city lights flickered like quiet applause outside my window. I thought of everything I had lost and everything I had gained because of it. Sometimes peace doesn't arrive in forgiveness or reconciliation. Sometimes it comes when you finally stop looking for approval and start living on your own terms. Looking back, the night that broke me was the one that rebuilt me. It wasn't just a turning point, it was the night I stopped being afraid of being misunderstood. I had spent years chasing approval from people who mistook control for care, mistook silence for respect. But the moment I stood my ground, even when it meant standing alone, everything changed. That single act of defiance had torn my life apart, only to rebuild it on stronger ground. Sometimes I think about that night when I'm driving down the wide avenues of Los Angeles, the city lights sliding across the hood of my Tesla. The streets hum beneath me, and the skyline glows like a promise kept. The reflection on the windshield reminds me of how far I've come, how the girl who once trembled in her father's shadow now drives through the same city with quiet certainty. Every red light feels like a pause to breathe, not a warning to stop. Every turn carries a calm I once thought I'd never find. As I pass the glass towers, I see echoes of my old life meetings where I wasn't heard, dinners where love came with conditions, choices that were never mine to make. But I no longer carry the bitterness. It's replaced by understanding. True respect, I've learned, isn't about submission or keeping peace at any cost. It's about knowing when your dignity matters more than your comfort, when silence becomes self-erasure, and when walking away is the only way to stay whole. Mom lives quietly now. After the fallout, she retreated from the spotlight, spending most of her days tending a small garden behind the house she once used for social events. Dad withdrew from public life too. His name no longer appears in magazines or financial reports, and though he once feared obscurity more than death, I think a part of him now finds peace in anonymity. My brother Ryan delivers packages around the city. I saw him once at a traffic light. He didn't see me, but there was something steady in his expression that I hadn't seen before, a kind of humility that looked a lot like freedom. I've stopped waiting for apologies or closure. The truth is, I don't need them anymore. The universe has its own quiet way of balancing things. The people who once tried to define my worth are now learning to redefine their own. There's no triumph in their downfall, only a strange kind of symmetry. One evening, after a long day at the office, I parked near the beach. The wind carried the scent of salt and dusk. I watched the waves roll in endless and patient, erasing footprints faster than they could be made. That's how healing works, I think, not as a sudden revelation, but as the slow rewriting of who you are. I sat there for a long time, my reflection faint on the car window, the city fading behind me, and whispered a thought that had taken years to understand. Respecting myself was never arrogance. It was survival. When I finally started the engine and pulled back onto the road, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The skyline shimmered ahead, alive, forgiving, and infinite. Sometimes peace is the loudest revenge. True respect isn't built on obedience or family name. It's built on fairness, courage, and knowing when to walk away. I learned that self-worth doesn't come from approval, but from the quiet certainty that you deserve peace. Eden's story shows that real strength lies not in winning arguments or proving others wrong, but in choosing yourself when no one else does, and realizing that doing so is the beginning of freedom, not its end. Thank you for staying with my story until the very end. If you've ever had to choose between peace and approval, share your experience in the comments. Someone out there might be standing at the same crossroads tonight, unsure of which way to go. Your story might be the light that helps them choose themselves, just like I finally did.